So a couple of days ago I decided to sit down and Google Medal of Honor, mainly because I wanted to see if there was any news on a potential new game, if there was any leaks, or anything even related to this series that I could get a bit excited for. Sadly there wasn't, but there was something that I did stumble across, and that was an article that stated that Medal of Honor Warfighter was originally built on the Unreal Engine. So after pretty much finding that out through the article, I decided to do a bit of digging, and I came across a UI that was designed by a company who were actually employed by Danger Close and the EA at the time. And within this little short video segment of the UI, we actually get a bit of gameplay, so you don't get a lot of gameplay within it. So based on the little snippet of details we have, based on the weapon's overall appearance, you can actually tell that it is using the Unreal Engine. It actually lines up pretty well with what the article says. What's interesting though is that this build, I believe, was actually created in September 2011, which means that the game roughly would have been just a little over a year away from development. So we know that they're now using the Unreal Engine in 2011. They've spent roughly a year developing this game on that engine, and now after the release of Battlefield 3, which came a month later in October of 2011, it got praised for its graphics, and EA more than likely looked at the developers and said, I want you guys to stop what you're doing with the Unreal Engine and I want you to use the Frostbite Engine because the game's getting really high praise. And EA at the time, who were heavily pushing the idea that Medal of Honor was a much more realistic shooter, probably wanted a much more higher detailed graphical engine, an engine that was getting praised at the time to push Medal of Honor Warfighter beyond what they were expecting it to do. Sadly, but this had negative effects. The major negative effect is that developers now have lost a year of work, so they have a year of work that they were building this game to be, the game that they wanted it to be, is now getting completely thrown out the window. And you're probably thinking, could they not just port it over? Well, the problem is when you're working with game engines, a lot of game engines have different coding, so there's variations, so there's that you have to work at. And also, this is a studio that had no experience working with Frostbite, so they had mainly worked on the Unreal Engine and Quake 3. Now, for instance, I'll give you a bit of information, a bit of history here when it comes to the Quake 3 engine. The original Medal of Honor game that came out all the way back in 1999, its sequel Medal of Honor Underground, Medal of Honor Frontline, Rising Sun, Pacific Assault, and Allied Assault, and even European Assault. Apologies for leaving that out, I shouldn't. But those games were all developed on the Quake 3 engine. Medal of Honor Airborne was actually created using the Unreal Engine. Medal of Honor 2010, the reboot, its campaign aspect was actually created using the Unreal Engine. And the multiplayer component of that game was developed by DICE using the Frostbite Engine. So that was actually a really weird situation where the game had two engines. It was practically two games in one. So it was, if you really think about it. Whereas Medal of Honor Warfighter was using Frostbite solely, so it was. Now what's really interesting about that is this shows that these developers had experience within the Unreal Engine, so it did. And I think it shows, especially with their work in 2010. For me, the Medal of Honor reboot in 2010 was a great game, so it was, especially the campaign. I really loved it, but one of the things I thought was really great about the campaign was the attention to detail. Danger Close at times spared no expense in trying to make this game the most realistic looking game, the most authentic game. And realistically, they probably pushed the boundaries of what the Unreal Engine, well, that iteration of the Unreal Engine could actually do at that time. The campaign looked gorgeous, especially nighttime missions. A lot of people preferred the daytime missions when you were in the valleys and stuff like that. For me personally, I actually thought the nighttime missions were more better, so that I don't know why. I just kind of like them better, I suppose you could say. But overall, this shows that this is a development team that had a lot of experience working on that engine, and they had actually spent a year working on this game within that engine. It's now getting thrown out the window, and they have to also learn the coding now for the Frostbite engine, and also they have to develop a game that would originally be built in 2 years in 1 year on a brand new engine. And there's probably a lot that you couldn't do on the Frostbite engine that maybe you could on the Unreal Engine, and there's a lot that you could do on the Frostbite engine that you couldn't do on the Unreal Engine. That was a bit of a tongue twister, I'm not going to lie, so it was, but the point is valid. Each individual game engine has its strengths and weaknesses, and a lot of them have different coding. So all that out of the way, what's really interesting about this little find, I don't know if we should call it a find, for the sake of the video, let's just call it the find or the extremely early alpha. What's interesting about it is it actually gives a bit of detail about potential planned DLC that might have come down the lane. So what you're seeing on screen now is actually a screenshot of this early build lobby, and there's actually 3 maps that we never got in the original game that came out in 2012, and I'm actually going to discuss them right now. So the first one is known as Floral Heights. Now what's interesting about this is actually a real place within the Philippines. Now for those of you guys who didn't play Medal of Honor Warfighter's campaign, there's actually a lot of the campaign settings that are placed in the Philippines itself, so I actually think that this makes sense. Now Floral Heights is actually a place that's located in Davao City, and Davao City is actually in the Philippines, and of course the campaign having Philippines based missions, that makes me believe that there's actually a lot of truth that we can take from this small little segment here to see what the original game would have actually been like in 2012. So Davao City being in the Philippines, and within Davao City there's a place called Floral Heights, and then we have that as one of the maps. So for me, that really makes me believe that we can take a lot of stuff from this and put it in the, yeah, it's legit category. So following on from that, we actually have a place called Bengali Desert. Now, There isn't actually a place called Bengali Desert, so there isn't. However, there is a desert that sort of connects eastern Pakistan to western India, and it's actually called the Thar Desert. Now, maybe Bengali was just an easier name for them to use. Maybe it was a name of reference, or maybe it was a part within the campaign that was maybe removed later on. I don't know, but I actually think that they've likely drawn inspiration from the Thar Desert and used it in this instead of that, and just renamed it as Bengali Desert. Because, like I say, Medal of Honor Warfighter, similar to the situation with the Philippines, Pakistan is heavily featured in the game itself and its prequel, Medal of Honor 2010. So again, I think we can take this. Now, there was another map that's mentioned in this, it's called Crazy Times. I actually have no connection whatsoever to make. The other two I can sort of make some sort of connection because they're based on real world locations, so you can actually make the connections and point dots to dots, and you have an answer to it, so we do. Crazy Times I have no answer for. That could literally be anything, so it could, but obviously it's a map regardless. So there's actually 3 maps here that we have that were not in the original game. Now, these 3 maps, I believe, would have made their way into DLC down the lane, so especially if they were already being built and if they were already designed, I have no doubt that eventually they would have been ported over to Frostbite Engine and released in sometime in 2013 had Medal of Honor Warfighter been a success, and had EA not cut this, well, not even just the studio, they cut the support for the game overall and pretty much just killed it after January 2013. But it's really interesting, that's what it is. But another thing I want to touch on is actually this: the UI and the menu itself. So Medal of Honor Warfighter was heavily criticised for its menu system. A lot of people thought there was too many sub-menus, it was a bit of a mess, you didn't know where to go to find anything. This version of the menu, for me, is so much more clean. It's a lot more straightforward, you can find what you're looking for, so you can. And overall, I think a lot of people would have just preferred a simple menu like this. Instead, we got the menu that we got with Warfighter, and it was, I agree, a pretty big mess. It was, if you wanted to get into lobbies with your friends, it was a challenge. If you wanted to find specific matches, again, it was a bit of a challenge. I haven't played the game for so long, I obviously know where I'm going and stuff like that, but for a lot of new players, it could have been a bit of an issue trying to figure out where you have to go. This UI, for me personally, seems so much more straightforward with this, and I actually think that they should have just ran with this. And I don't actually blame an engine swap over for changing the UI on that aspect, so don't, because realistically, the menus are probably one of the easier aspects to make when it goes from engine to engine. So yeah, and it's actually pretty similar to the Battlefield 3 made menus we got a year prior. So again, I have no excuses for the developers in that aspect. I just think it's, well, we're moving to a different engine, let's show off a bit, and they got a bit overboard, if you will, and just made a bit of a mess. But that aside, that's what it is. So looking at the actual gameplay itself, again, it's such a small fragment of gameplay we'll have, so it is, so we'll never get any more than what you can actually see on screen here. But one of the things I think is interesting is if we put up on screen that gameplay and then actual gameplay that I've taken from Medal of Honor Warfighter, the official release, you can actually see the similarities but also the differences. Okay, so the first thing I actually want to touch on is actually when the soldier dies. So in the original Medal of Honor Warfighter, whenever we were to be killed or died, what ended up happening is we got a red silhouette of the person who eliminated us. Whereas in this, you don't actually get that. Instead, you actually get the option of watching a kill cam. Now, a lot of people were saying after Medal of Honor 2010 that they thought that the game needed something like a kill cam, so it did. Which, again, I agree with, because you just died instantly and you didn't know how or where you died from. And it was really annoying, so it was. But instead of actually making us forcefully watch a kill cam every single time, whenever we died, we were actually given the option if we wanted to see a kill cam somewhere. And I actually think that's a really interesting thing that Call of Duty could maybe take, because a lot of people always skip the kill cams. A lot of people aren't interested unless it's a really suspicious one in Call of Duty games. But I actually think if you actually get the option to watch it, it could maybe make you think, yeah, you know what, I'll watch it and see how I ended up dying. So I actually think it shows that the developers did take a lot of what the community was saying after the 2010 game on. They took a lot of that, but what happened was EA just said to them, stop what you're doing, build this game instead. And I think it shows, because like I say, a lot of the community feedback was saying that they wanted something like a kill cam feature. These guys obviously did take the kill cam maybe a bit strong. Maybe a lot of people say it's a bit too on the nose. It's straight up copying Call of Duty, maybe. But I actually think giving people the option to have a kill cam would have been a much better feature than just a red silhouette that you get whenever you died in the original game. Again, it's just my opinion. Maybe some people say it's too on the nose, it's too Call of Duty-like, but I think it would have worked. Another really interesting feature is if we go back to the screenshot where I showcased the name of the maps, you'll actually see that the amount of players you could have originally had in a lobby was actually 32. Now, why this is interesting is because Medal of Honor Warfighter, whenever the official game came out, it was 10v10, so you could have 20 players at most in a lobby. In this version of the game, they wanted you to have 32 players. Now, again, a lot of people were saying that was probably just taken from Battlefield, because on the consoles a year prior, Battlefield, it had 32 players, so that I know PC was always bigger, but 32 players nonetheless. It's more players than Warfighter initially launched with, and it actually shows that we may have got a very, very different game overall, because if you have bigger lobbies, effectively you have bigger maps. So again, that's just my own opinion. Also in this, we have an option of 4 game modes. We have Black Hawk Moan, I believe it's called. We have Team Deathmatch, we have Sports, and we have Combat Mission. So obviously we know Combat Mission is pretty much a smaller scale version of Rush that they sort of put their own twist on when the official game came out. So that it was also in Medal of Honor 2010. Team Deathmatch is pretty universal, so it is, and yeah, you know what you're getting with Team Deathmatch, so you do. Sports and Black Hawk Moan. First of all, Black Hawk Moan, I have no idea what the hell that is. Okay, maybe one of you guys has an idea and you could potentially, you know, tell me in the comments below if you want. I have no idea. But when it comes to sport, I actually think that might have been the game mode that was eventually known as Home Run. Now, Home Run was 10 3-minute rounds of basically capture the flag with no respawn. So it was you and your 2-man army, so it was pretty much squads effectively. And yeah, I think sports was eventually a precursor to that, and so that's why I say it. Just the reason I use that term is because sports to me seems like a very fast-paced mode, and this version of capture the flag, aka Home Run, it seems like that was the sort of theme that they were going with here, so it does. Again, I could be wrong and it could have been a completely different mode, but you never know. And for the last thing that I want to add to this, it's just a little funny thing that I thought was interesting. This game's title was actually originally supposed to be Medal of Honor 2 Warfighter, and I think that the reason they had it like that is because they weren't 100% certain on if they wanted to go straight up Medal of Honor 2 or if they wanted to actually call it Warfighter. The point is, the name Warfighter was always being floated about for a long ass time, clearly, even though people laughed at it and thought it was the very last minute. Medal of Honor 2, I've always said I think it made more sense to just call that. It's a reboot, plus Medal of Honor 2 technically doesn't even exist. The original sequel was called Underground. But it's really interesting, you guys, because looking at this and then seeing what we got, I actually think that the Medal of Honor Warfighter that we actually got released isn't the game that these guys were developing. The game that we were actually supposed to get was much more of this sort of style. So it was meant to have bigger multiplayer sessions, so it was bigger servers, it was meant to have different game modes, it was run on a different engine. What I can only assume is what happened is that EA has said that we want you to run it on the Frostbite Engine. They've said we don't have enough time to develop a fully functional brand new game on this engine because we've spent the whole year using this engine. EA said, okay, take assets from Battlefield. They took a lot of the stuff from Battlefield, poured it over. A lot of the campaign was actually cut down quite a bit. A lot of people said it was military stuff and the government got involved, which is true. I actually do believe that because there's some highly confidential stuff that they shouldn't have actually put in the game, according to most reports. But at the same time, I actually think it was because a lot couldn't actually be ported over from the Unreal Engine to Frostbite. So realistically, the game that we got in 2012 wasn't the real Medal of Honor Warfighter, so it wasn't. Even though I enjoyed the game we got in 2012, I look at this and I go, we missed out potentially on a much more stable game, a finished game, and a game that I've always said having it on the Frostbite Engine made it look too much like Battlefield, that people would have said, yeah, I don't want to play it because I have Battlefield at home, there's no point in buying a smaller scale Battlefield experience, so there isn't. Having it on its own engine would have given it its own theme and identity, so it would have helped it stand out a bit more, and maybe more people would have picked it up. Overall, EA's decision and meddling it didn't work for the game. It killed the game and stopped any potential momentum the 2010 did have for the series. But I've been Recurse, you've been you. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please leave it a like. If you dislike it, obviously leave it a dislike. If you feel that you want to add to this, you want to talk about this, please engage in the comments. I'm always open to replying and talking to you guys throughout whatever video I make. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Have a nice day. And as always, if you're new around here and you want to see more, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. And yeah, have a nice day, guys. Peace.